Hello again, everybody, and welcome to the LSU Sports Insider podcast. Today's Monday, July the 21st. The gang is back together. Scott, well, not together. That's the wrong word. We're virtually together, giving you guys a virtual fist bump. I'm Zach Ewing with Scott Rabalais and Wilson Alexander, all from different locales across the South. But we are here to talk SEC Media Days. Between all of the travel going on between all three of us, we couldn't make that happen last week, but we did want to recap sort of the unofficial start to the 2025 football season. So, guys, I know it's always kind of crazy out there, but anything in particular stand out about this year's SEC Media Days?
I guess what stood out was all the talk about Hugh Freeze's golf game and the fact the silly rumor about Nick Saban returning to coaching, which I don't think that has any legs. And when those were your two biggest stories at Media Days, it wasn't very eventful, to be quite honest. I think Rab and I were talking about this, and Rab has covered Media Days longer than I have. It was a little bit more subdued than I'm used to Media Days being, even though it's still like talking season. It's not like anything really important ever happens for the most part. It felt like very like they just didn't have a whole lot of pizzazz this year.
Yeah, and some of the stories were just a little on the old side. They were kind of like leftovers, right? You know, as soon as Greg Sankey got up there Monday morning before Brian Kelly spoke, he was like, you know, what's the deal with the scheduling format? Is there any news on that? And of course, talk about the college football playoff expanding. And then for us, from a local perspective, but you know, one of the best things about Media Days is networking with people. And so talking to people about the possibility of Media Days coming to New Orleans sometime in the future, which I think it definitely will. Otherwise, I agree with Wilson. It was just kind of, okay, everybody comes in, everybody goes out, and it wasn't, there wasn't a whole lot of sizzle, in part because Nick Saban isn't coaching anymore. You know, if he comes back to coach, well, there'll be some sizzle next year, but some SEC school, but I agree with Wilson. Don't think that's happening.
Yeah. I understand why they did it, but when they moved Media Days up, like 2 weeks, this is going, not for this year, but I'm talking like 10 years ago or something, that it used to be like late July and now it's mid-July. And I understand why they did it, because it's the slowest week on the sports calendar. You know, not even baseball's playing. Like, you can kind of really own the stage, but it also is still so far away from the start of the season now. We have this like gap before they even start fall camp. So I don't know. I mean, like, it's fun, but it's also, I wonder if the coaches are just sort of realizing that now when you have your almost year-round coverage of this sport, every team gets, you know, a dedicated beat writer like Wilson, who's covering this team from January through December, every single year, every single week. I don't know that Media Days is quite as necessary for the teams. And so that may be where you get that more subdued feeling from the coaches. I don't know.
Well, I think now it's definitely changed. I mean, I've covered Media Days since like 1996. And it used to be like, you didn't have a chance to talk to anybody. There was no internet. You needed to get stuff to get you going for the season. And now, like you said, the Wilsons of the SEC are covering their teams 24/7. But it's still, for the SEC, it's still important, I think, because it just gets them out there. You know, it just gets people, talking about football again. The SEC network, of course, now exists, and they got the Paul Feinbaum show there, and they're doing interviews, and all these people out there with their radio shows are there, and it just sets the tone and sets the stage for the SEC to be the thing that everybody's talking about, even if the talk is a little bit, well, the SEC hasn't won the last 2 national championships. What's going on?
Into panic.
And so a little bit of that, but it's still it gets things going. I mean, for people like Wilson and myself, football season is here now. It's a long way away for most of you guys till August 30th when LSU kicks off at Clemson, but it's here for us. And then it just morphs into Brian Kelly speaking to the Rotary Club on Wednesday here in Baton Rouge, and then camp will start later this month, and then it's on. And so it's that, but it's become that rite of summer. Although I will say, Zach, there was a lot going on in Atlanta. 2 Beyonce concerts while we were there. Next door at Mercedes-Benz Stadium, there was a WWE event at Phillips Arena and the All-Star Game. So there was a lot going on. There was a lot going on in Atlanta, non-football stuff, but it was interesting to be there at that time with all these things going on, and it was made it a little hard to get around. It reminded me of New Orleans sometimes when all these things are going on.
Yeah, I guess
real quick, something you said there reminded me of, oh my gosh, the name of the movie is suddenly escaping me. Somebody help me out. The skating one with Will Ferrell, where golly, I'm forgetting the name of the movie.
Blades of Glory.
Thank you. I wanted to say Blazing Saddles, and I'm like, that's not it.
Yeah.
But it's sort of Blade is the beginning of the name, but I can't remember it. Anyway, when he goes, they're just like, it gets the people going. Like anyway. Yeah, that's all I have to add.
I mean, I guess what I'm saying, because I don't think I was very eloquent a minute ago, but I guess what I'm saying is, if there's a headline about an SEC team, this is where it used to come out. Oh my gosh, so-and-so has an injury at quarterback, or so-and-so's running back got in trouble and may not start this year, or whatever it might be. Like, that's already out. That those things come out in April or May or June or whenever they happen. And by the time SEC Media Days roll around, we're all just kind of talking about the same stuff that we've been talking about. But now it's just sort of this, it's more of like you said, Rab, it's sort of this rite of summer where it's like, hey, it's time to get going again. Even though it's not quite time to get going. LSU opens camp next week, but it is time to start talking about it, at least, and getting serious about it. And so with that in mind, SEC Media Days wraps up with the media poll, the predicted order of finish. First of all, did you guys submit ballots for this?
Yes.
I voted. I've got my little stick. No, I don't have a stick there, but yeah, I voted.
And second of all, I've always thought it's maybe even, we'll talk about in a minute, the preseason all SEC team is even more difficult to do. It's kind of difficult to peg these teams in July, isn't it?
Yes, especially once you get past 4. So like the top 4 felt like there was a pretty general consensus among it being Texas, Georgia, Alabama, LSU, and LSU being at 4. That's where I had LSU was at 4. So them finishing there, personally, I felt made sense because I thought the same thing. But then 5 through like 11 was just a total crapshoot. That's where I think the most interesting sort of order is in the SEC this year, is who is able to kind of finish at 5, because I mean a lot of these teams play each other. Someone's got to lose week to week. You talk about other team could go 10-2, but maybe that team could go 10-2. Well, they all can't go 10-2. They all even can't go 9-3. So I think that's what's really fascinating. It's like, where do where's Auburn in this? Where's Missouri in this? What about Florida? I voted them number 5, but I don't feel great about it because the schedule is pretty tough. But South Carolina could be there too. That's where I think things get really interesting, is like 5 through 11.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I mean, I think the top 4, and if you look at the total points, which they, if team gets a first place, it's just like the AP poll. Team gets a first place vote, they get 16 points. Second place vote is 15 points, and so on. And the biggest gap of any number of points is between 4 and 5. There's like a 500-point gap between LSU at 4 and South Carolina at 5. But then there's only like a 500-point gap between South Carolina at 5 and Oklahoma at 10. So I really think 5 through 11, 5 through 12. And we saw this last year, right? Like there's going to be ties. Not everybody plays everybody with an 8-game schedule. There was there was like a big glut in the SEC last year where there was a tie for second between Georgia and Tennessee. And then there was like a 5-way tie for 4th place between Alabama and LSU and Ole Miss and South Carolina and Texas A&M. And I think Missouri, they were all 5-3. So that could easily happen again this year, where they're just going to be a bunch of 5-3 teams. But for this exercise, Rab, you had to pick an order.
Yeah, it's worth reminding folks at this point that, again, the SEC has done away with divisions. When Texas and Oklahoma joined the league last year, they did away with divisions. So it's just 1 through 16, and the top 2 teams after tiebreakers will play in the SEC championship game. So it's just important to get in that top 2. And for the college football playoff, you figure if you're in the top 4, you're one of those top 4 teams. If that's how things turn out, you figure you're in pretty good shape to make the playoff. But Wilson's absolutely right. It's just throwing darts to try to figure out who the teams are after that, because we're saying, and Wilson said he voted South Carolina 5th. I forget who I voted 5th. I don't think it was South Carolina. It might have been Might have been Tennessee.
I had Florida at 5.
Oh, yeah, Florida at 5. Excuse me. Florida at 5. I did not have Florida at 5. I might have had South Carolina, but it was a you're trying to figure out who is on the cusp of CFP contention, because you can see the SEC getting 5 teams in possibly, and but it's just surviving and winning a string of close games to get to that point. It's an impossible task to tell. Maybe Texas A&M will find the right formula with Marcel Reed, and maybe Tennessee will solve their problems created by the Emalieva, what I'm saying his name right, departure, and maybe someone else will surprise, and certainly someone else is going to fail. Someone of these teams is going to go just spinning out of the rankings or out of contention, a la Florida State last year when they were ranked in the top 10 and then finished 2-10. So it's a total crapshoot, and having 16 teams makes it even more difficult. But it's what makes it fun. But I think generally speaking, the respect is there. If you're an LSU fan, the respect is there for LSU to be an SEC contender. I think if you're in the top 4, you're considered, you have a chance to win the conference or get to the championship game and certainly make the playoff, which is the ultimate goal for everybody.
Quick question for both of you. Who do you think in that 5 to 12 range is ranked in this poll that we have up on the screen is ranked too low? Who do you think will end up higher than maybe they are right there, or at least has a chance? What would be your sleeper team?
I want to say Tennessee, because I just think Tennessee at 9 after making the playoff last year. I know obviously they have some losses, but it seems like Josh Heupel, their coach, has done a pretty good job establishing them. But I wasn't prepared to buy the Auburn talk, or anything like that. And Hugh Freeze kind of comes off as a flim-flam man to me. Every time I hear him talk, he sounds like a televangelist or something like that you don't have respect for. But doing the All SEC story when the polls came out, they had more people voted on the preseason All SEC first, second, third team than I expected. So I'm going to switch my pick and say Auburn. I'm going to say Auburn is going to be is going to end up higher than 11th.
My answer is, and I swear I'm not biased, but only because they're ranked 12th there, and I think that's the absolute floor for them would be Missouri. By the way, I could only fit 12 teams on here. The bottom 4 are Vanderbilt 13th, Arkansas 14th, Kentucky 15th, and then Mississippi State to wrap things up. But I just think if you look at that 5 through 12 range, like we said, anybody could finish 12th out of that group, I feel like. And so just to say any one team is 12th is probably unlikely. They'll probably finish higher than that. My other answer, Wilson, I'm curious to know what you think too, but my other answer would be Oklahoma with John Mateer. Brent Venables probably feeling the pressure. He's taking over defensive play calling. I could see the Sooners making a jump.
I could too, because you would expect, just because you can't imagine that 2 years in a row you're not going to have any healthy wide receivers. You would expect them to have some healthy targets on the outside and more stability on the offensive line, which they didn't have last year either. Mateer coming in, like you said, with his offensive coordinator from Washington State, Ben Arbuckle, also adding Jaden Ott, the running back from Cal. That's a sneaky combination there in the backfield for Oklahoma. It's going to be really fascinating to see what they can do. The other team that I think would be worth mentioning is just A&M. They're there at 8, and 8 might be a really reasonable spot, but I could also see them finishing 5th in the conference. I feel like there's a world where that happens. They went out and they added some receivers in the offseason, like Casey Concepcion from NC State. They really seem high on Marcel Reed. They were talking up him a lot on that last day of media days.
Didn't bring him though. Did not bring him to media days, but
no, they didn't. So it was Elko and the players, speaking highly about him, going into his second year as a starter after taking over the job there last year. They're going to be the kind of team that just physical defense, running the ball a ton with Reed there. I feel like they could really wear some teams down that maybe aren't as ready for that. And so I feel like A&M has a shot to finish higher than 8 as well. That would be another team I think is worth mentioning. But Oklahoma's good there at 10. And gosh, LSU plays so many of these teams. They don't really get much of a break. This is a hard schedule. Other than Vanderbilt, they don't, in Arkansas, I guess, but they don't get to play, Kentucky or Mississippi State this year. They got to play a lot of these top teams in the league. They also don't have to play Texas or Georgia. But man, that range from 3 through 12, there's a lot of LSU's opponents on there.
Yeah, they play 6 of their 8 SEC games are ranked between 3 and 10. So that's really kind of, they're going to get a chance to prove where they belong in that range. the flip side to your question, Wilson, which was a good one, is which teams rank too high? Because if some of these teams are going to move up, somebody else is going to move down. I know my answer to this, but I'm curious to know yours.
I think mine would probably be South Carolina at 5. I think that would be the one for me because, I mean, they've lost a good bit on defense, especially on the defensive line. They still bring back, Dylan Stewart and some good players up there, but they lost Kennard and some of their defensive tackles. And, one of their, defensive backs was drafted highly. His name suddenly escapes me. But, they also haven't really, any proven threats on the outside at receiver. I think a lot of that has to do with, Sellers. I believe in what he can do as a quarterback. But I think South Carolina at 5 would be the one that maybe is rated a little bit too highly.
Yeah, that was mine too. Not that I don't think they're a good team or could be a good team. They remind me a little bit of Missouri last year, where they kind of popped off and had this huge surprise season. And those programs it's more difficult for them to repeat that a second year than it is even to pop off one year. I think now that the target's on their back a little bit. You mentioned a lot they've lost on defense. They won quite a few close games last year. Can you repeat that sort of a season? And I mean, because if you're 5th in the SEC, you're probably a top 15 team in the country, or at least top 20. And I think that might be a little bit rich for them. Rab, what about you?
Yeah, South Carolina. Everyone brings some bias into this, and bias includes what teams did last year. South Carolina, was a loss to LSU away from making the playoff, very likely. They beat Clemson at the end of the year, and so the LSU loss they helped them go 9-3. So I think there's that
one too.
Yeah, I mean, clearly, and there's that SEC. If we want to talk about this later, the SEC documentary that's coming out that focuses a lot in the first episode on that game. But my pick would be Alabama. I think people are, is Ty Simpson at quarterback going to be all that for Alabama after being a backup for a couple of years? Maybe he is, maybe he's not. I think there's a lot of built-in momentum of respect for Alabama because of what Alabama has been. But they're
also bringing back a lot of players. That helps.
That's true. That's true. I'm not saying that they're going to be awful, but this presumes that they're going to be in the playoff, and I could see them. We were at dinner somewhere the other night. I was watching their game at Oklahoma, who was not a very good team last year. They were, they just weren't. And Alabama lost that game. They lost at Vanderbilt. Of course, they looked like the Philadelphia Eagles in Tiger Stadium, but they're just so inconsistent. And I'm not buying that they're going to be that consistent Alabama juggernaut of old again this year. But that's just me.
Okay, well, we've gone almost 20 minutes and barely talked about LSU, so we should probably change.
We should do that. LSU was picked 4th. The preseason all SEC team, maybe a little more of a sore spot for LSU fans. Whit Weeks was the only guy picked on the first team at linebacker. The big one, Wilson, is Garrett Nussmeier. They went Lenore Sellers at first team, Nuss is second team. I personally would have had that flipped. I think Nuss has proven more and is a better bet to have a big season. I talked about, not that I don't respect Lenore Sellers. I have a little bit more doubt with him. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's reasonable to feel that way. Garrett's I think he's the only returning quarterback in the country who's threw for more than 4,000 yards last year. He had a good season, and it's reasonable to think that he would get better. Just taking that natural progression. Is he going to be a Heisman Trophy contender? We're going to see him in New York. I mean, we're way too far off from all that, but he should be one of the top quarterbacks in the SEC and in the country. I mean, the Athletic put out their quarterback tiers, every team in the country, and they had Garrett Nussmeier at 2 behind Cade Klubnik, which really sets up some fascinating stuff for week 1. But I think that, I don't know if I would go so far as to say that Garrett Nussmeier was snubbed. There's a lot of good quarterbacks in the SEC this year, but I personally voted Nussmeier for the first team. I feel like, going into the season, as you said, that's probably the safest bet. And so, but I don't necessarily doubt anybody for putting Lenore Sellers on the first team. He brings a lot as a runner. If he can continue to develop his, how he reads the field and his progression as a passer, and actually has some targets on the outside to throw to that are really productive, then, he could be that kind of first team quarterback. But yeah, I feel like Garrett was probably the more proven player, and thus should have been probably on the first team. But I can understand it if somebody picked Lenore, or if they'd even picked somebody else. I think there's some other good candidates there too. We saw Arch Manning on the third team, and he hasn't played much at all, which I know
Rabalais didn't even make a team. Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, you could definitely go either way with that. I think it's more likely when we're looking at the postseason all SEC team, it seems much more likely Nussmeier is the first team quarterback than Sellers. But again, I'm a little bit down on the Gamecocks compared to everybody else. Rab Whitweek's first team preseason SEC, quite a nod for him. And then LSU also had 4 guys on the second team. We mentioned Nussmeier, but also Kaden Durham at running back, Aaron Anderson at wide receiver, and Harold Perkins was the other one at linebacker.
Yeah, Whitweeks, first of all, he tied for second in the SEC in total tackles last season. Just, the motor's always on. I think people respect the way he plays. He doesn't always, I think Wilson and I have probably talked about this, he doesn't always play perfectly. He'll make a mistake or something like that, but he's always given his all-out best on every play, and I think he was well deserving of that. Kaden Durham, being the second team running back, I was impressed by that level of respect for him. I think I probably had him, in that range on my ballot, but I wasn't sure everyone else would. But they saw the kind of talent he has, and from our perspective, maybe a little bit is like, I think maybe Wilson would agree, the running back situation is a little more unsettled at LSU this year. Could have Harlan Berry come in, for example, and shine and kind of take that job away. But Durham, was turned a lot of heads last season. And then you got guys like Berry and Brown, who could have been, I think, one of those receivers. Of course, Aaron Anderson was that was the second team pick and a good choice there. But Berry and Brown got the second team kick returner. I thought he should be the first team kick returner. I can't wait to see him back there on special teams. I think he's going to give LSU a dimension that they've kind of lacked the last couple of years. Wilson's story was great. People haven't read it. His former teammates to talk about how fast he is and just what a blur he is. That was a great quote, Wilson. I don't remember who it was from, but that was a great quote about him. So I thought, one first teamer for LSU, that seems a little light, but there were, a total of 7 guys had a total of 8 picks. There was one player who was a second teamer and a third teamer on special teams. So that's a healthy representation for LSU. I don't think people should be too shocked by that or say that LSU doesn't match up talent wise.
The Kaden Durham pick actually kind of made a lot of sense to me because he had a good freshman year and while playing through an injury. And the running back in the SEC this year, there isn't any just proven household names going into the season. I mean, there's guys who could. It's going to be kind of an interesting year there where we've got a lot of quarterbacks who, have already kind of established themselves in some ways, and a lot of them who need to take another step. But it looks like a good quarterback year in the SEC. It doesn't look like the strongest year at running back in the SEC. All that. So I think there's kind of an opportunity there for Kaden Durham, who already did some really good things as a freshman, to be on that second team going into the year. And that feels like a good spot for him. And I was pleased to see that Aaron Anderson got his accolades too, because we talked a lot this offseason about what LSU has added at wide receiver, but they also brought back Aaron Anderson, who by the end of the year was the leading receiver on the team. Part of that was because, Kyron Lacey didn't play in the bowl game, but, he ended up going for over 800 yards and really had a breakout sophomore year. And so I think it was appropriate that he ended up being that representation on the second team out receiver for LSU. And gosh, yeah, when you look at the return game for LSU with Xavier Thomas and Berry and Brown, they're well represented on these all SEC preseason teams. And it finally looks like maybe after a few years removed from LSU not returning anything because it was just fair catch and get out of there. It looks like they might actually have some dynamic guys in the return game.
A lot of respect for Harold Perkins too. Let's say real quickly. I mean, for his ability, be a second teamer after someone who, sophomore year, didn't go well. Last year was hurt in September and missed most of the season. But people remember Harold Perkins and the flashes that he has shown that he can be a great player. And I still don't know what kind of season Harold Perkins is going to have either. But it shows the respect that his talent deserves to be on the second team. That people remember how good he can be, and then when he's on, he's one of the very best, not only in the SEC but the country.
I think there's also just an element of name recognition there that he burst on the scene as a freshman. People still remember him, and these all SEC preseason teams, there's some, you're asking guys, a lot of writers who maybe don't cover or like pay close attention to every team in the league to pick these things. And so if your name is sort of known, I think that helps you get on there.
No doubt.
Yeah, I also think that there's probably some schools that have more media there than others, and so they know their teams. It's not even bias as much as, I mean, it is bias, but it's not. They're not trying to be unfair. It's just they're picking who they know, and they know the players on the team they cover more than they know the teams on. Like, can you name me Kentucky's best offensive lineman? I can't. It's hard enough to keep up with my team, much less 16. So
they ask you to real quick. The long snappers also get some love on the preseason All-SEC team. Rocco Underwood from Florida was not on the first team. It is a travesty. If you want to talk about snubs, that's the snub.
Well, okay. In all seriousness,
Can't believe it.
My other preseason All-SEC takeaway, speaking of specialists, Georgia swept the first team specialists.
Yeah.
A clean like this is a 16-team league, people. They have the first team punter, first team kicker, first team long snapper, first team kickoff specialist, first team return specialist, and first team all-purpose, the same guy, Zachariah Branch. Georgia they must have the best special teams in the history of college football. Like, how does one team sweep this?
That's what I'm saying. Rocco Underwood should have been on there.
As you said, local media. We were in Atlanta, so that does. And those are that's the ultimate like long snap. What I saw in the ballot, the ballot said pick three of long snappers.
Get out Google. Yeah, that's the only way I'm doing that.
Anyway.
Yeah. Well, it's always kind of funny to compare these lists to the postseason list, because there will be, by week 5, there will be some player somewhere in the SEC where we're going, oh my gosh, how did we not know about that kid? He's going to be so, and he'll be a lock to not only be first team SEC, but he'll be in the awards conversations and everything else. It happens every year. It happened with Lenore Sellers last year and Dylan Stewart in South Carolina. Like it happens every single year. It'll happen again, and we just don't know their names yet. So anyway, LSU actually talked early in media days, and I want to talk some takeaways from that. And one thing that really stuck out to me, and I guess it's not surprising, Wilson, but like Brian Kelly, after losing to USC last year, we remember how upset he was, and that was LSU's 5th straight season opening loss. They are doing everything they can to make sure that doesn't happen again.
Brian Kelly this offseason has come out and almost gotten ahead of the conversation and sort of set the tone for the whole conversation around the opener, which I think might be kind of smart, at least from a public relations perspective, to instead of sort of trying to downplay it in any way, they've just come out and said it, that this is a big game for them, that they need to get off to a good start. When I was in the facility for assignment we had in June, I could see on the weight room screens where it said 1-0 all over them. I didn't see the Clemson prop prints myself yet, so I'm looking forward to maybe finding those in the facility during preseason camp at some point. But Brian Kelly said that they have them all over the weight room, on the bags that they hit and things like that. That's a big change from what they've done in the offseason. There's even little changes that they've made to their training program. Garrett Nussmeier was telling me about how just the way that Jake Flint, the strength coach, is playing music, where they sort of play music that the players find to, kind of unpopular for most of the team runs. And they have kind of a halftime where they play the music they like you would try to sort of simulate mentally being in a locker room kind of thing, and then back out to the music that they don't like, is supposed to help kind of get them ready for that road atmosphere week 1 at Clemson. I mean, there's just been this focus on it. But there's also, I think Garrett Nussmeier brought a perspective to this that could really end up being important for LSU, which is that this isn't also the end-all be-all. It's that they need to start week 1 1-0. But if they were to lose that game, then the very next week, it's once again 1-0. I think it's all about not getting too far ahead of themselves. That's something that Garrett said that in the past they've struggled with, that they expect to compete for national championships. They're looking toward the end goal instead of focusing right in front of them. That itself is kind of a problem, but they've, I guess, at least acknowledged and identified that problem, and now they're working to address it. And so, yeah, everybody all offseason is talking about, can LSU finally win week 1? And it's going to be really important. It's also probably going to be the hardest week 1 game they've played since that losing streak began. And so it's a tough game, really is. But that was certainly the talk of the day on Monday, was LSU coming kind of right out and just saying, yeah, we know this has been an issue. And they have certainly changed some things here in the offseason to try to address it.
I find this fascinating because there's really two ways LSU could have done this. They could have just said, look, it's just another game. We have to treat it like it's another game. We're not going to talk about the losing streak to open seasons. We're just going to talk about a very good Clemson team. Or they could do what they did and almost overemphasize the fact that they need to win to win this opener. Now, the danger of that, as you said, Wilson, is what Nussmeier mentioned, is like, well, now because it is the toughest of any of these games. If you look back, like USC last year, we thought they were going to be a top 20 team. They ended up not even being that good. Florida State, the couple years before that, I guess 2 years ago, playing Florida State, that team ended up being very good. But other than that, none of these other opponents were even really close to what we think Clemson will be this year. So the fact that you have overemphasized it, despite the fact knowing that you could lose it, and then you have to kind of pick yourself up from that, that's fascinating to me, Rab.
Yeah, I mean, you got it's a huge game. It's important because if you lose this game, you really can only figure on dropping one more in SEC play and still having a shot to make the college football playoffs. So there's not much margin for error. If you lose this one, then you could go 6-2 in SEC play theoretically and make it. So it's huge, and you got to try something different, right? You lost, since 2019, lost to Mississippi State in the opener. When they got through for 1,500 yards against LSU for state. They lost at UCLA in the Rose Bowl. They lost to Florida State in New Orleans, lost to Florida State in Orlando, lost to USC in Las Vegas. You got to try something. And all those games, except for the game in Orlando, I think LSU, you figure probably should have won. You think they should at least gone 3-2 in those games. So it's you got to try something different. You might as well. I mean, and 3 of those games are under Brian Kelly, 2 were under Orgeron. So you got to do something different. I'm reminded somewhat, Rab likes to set the Wayback Machine. I'm reminded this is the biggest opener. We'll see what the teams are ranked when the AP poll finally comes out. This is the biggest opener for LSU since 2011, when it was number 4 LSU against number 3 Oregon in Arlington at the AT&T Stadium. And I remember leading up to that game, LSU, mainly not because of lack of success in openers, because they did have a lot of success in openers under Les Miles, but mainly because of the offensive challenge that Chip Kelly's offense presented LSU, and it was a unique challenge and everything. They really spent more time drilling down on that team and their tendencies and what they did than they had done in past games, and it resulted in a 40-27 victory. Now that's, like I said, a really tough opponent, but on a neutral field. This is different because you're going to Clemson, but this is something that they've decided to make a point of emphasis. And I say, why not? I mean, you gotta try to shake something up a little bit differently. And LSU is going to be going over there. They're going to be the underdog. They're probably not as far as highly a ranked team as they're going to be. They're not going to be expected to win, but it doesn't have to be the end of your season. As big a game as it is, and it is, it doesn't have to be the end of their season. And as Wilson said, maybe it gets them into a different different frame of mind, because it's obviously a lot of SEC tough games are down the road after you play Clemson, including a game against Florida. If you lose the game, I've been looking not too far down the road to Florida the third week of the season. If you lose at Clemson, you can't lose to Florida. I mean, at home, you have to hold serve at home against the Gators, and that's not going to be a gimme game by any means.
Yeah, the pressure will certainly increase exponentially if you were to lose to Clemson, especially after talking about it so much. So that was maybe the main talking point for LSU in its time with the local media and then at the podium in Atlanta. What else stood out, Wilson? You wrote a story. Not that Brian Kelly is going to say, oh, I'm really worried about the offensive line, but he kind of went out of his way to defend the fact that people see this O-line as a weakness.
Yeah, this was Kelly for the first time this offseason sort of setting some expectations for this offensive line, saying that he's bullish on them and kind of pushing back against the concerns that are very reasonable that I think a lot of us have about this offensive line. You're replacing 4 starters. I mean, this is a tall task, and it's a real test of LSU's recruiting and development over the past few years, while the Will Campbells and Emory Jones and those other guys that they had up front were sort of cemented as your starters. LSU always recognized that it was going to have to replace them at some point. It was probably going to have to replace 4 of them, like it is right now, at the same time. So it's been preparing for this inevitability, but all of a sudden now that's here. So we didn't see a whole lot out of this offensive line in spring practice. They were shuffling around a good bit. Brian Kelly even said that they would probably take that competition halfway into preseason camp and then decide who the starters are going to be. And despite all that, here he is at media days saying that he's bullish on the offensive line because of the recruiting and development that's happened over the past few years, the transfers that they've added, that they aren't. I think really the reason when you boil it down that he gave for that confidence is that they're not having to roll out a true freshman. These are guys who've been in the program for a couple of years who are now going to be first-time starters, but they've at least been sort of waiting in the wings, like Tyree Adams at left tackle in particular is, I think, an example of that. And so we'll see if he's right. Sometimes Kelly, though, here in the offseason says things about the team, about, how these guys are going to be great and all these, I'm reminded of him saying, really, really complimentary of Savion Jones 2 years ago. And then he had a pretty rough junior season. He ended up coming back, having a decent senior year, getting drafted, but it wasn't the junior year that Kelly set his expectations of. And so, that sometimes happens here in the offseason. So it's something to kind of keep in mind here. But if they actually do meet Brian Kelly's expectations up front, and him being bullish on this offensive line comes to, is accurate, then, that's a great thing, because that's probably the biggest concern for this team. So, that was certainly a comment, a little word there that he dropped that stood out.
Yeah, I mean, to say you're confident because you're not starting a true freshman is like, how many SEC teams are actually starting true freshmen on their offensive line? Like that's a little bit like saying I'm really confident because our guys all played high school football. I mean, like, of course. Is this coach speak, Rab? Is there something else there? Do you take Kelly at his word?
Yeah, a little bit. Brian, I think after now in his fourth season, you start to see tendencies of how coaches talk, and he's like, after the fact might say, we didn't do this well. But kind of reminded of 2023, where he never really said, God, we have a horrible defense, which you're not going to really say. But you know what I'm saying? Didn't really even go there, like, in terms of when everybody's like, this is really bad. And like, yeah, we're working on this and that. We're trying to get better. And I'm seeing this or that. So there's a little bit of that. But look, Wilson's right. This is, for all the bells and whistles and having, returning and bringing in some look like some really talented wide receivers and tight ends, and returning a top level quarterback like Garrett Nussmeier, the top guy in the SEC in yards passing and touchdowns, returning from 2024. You still got to block and you still got to tackle, and the tail of LSU's season will be how well they do those things on the offensive and defensive lines. I mean, they seem to be improved they got good linebackers. They seem to be improved in the secondary. They seem to have good skilled players, adequate players at running back, and an excellent quarterback and receivers. But you got to block and you got to tackle, and they're going to be put to the test immediately, because Clemson is regarded as having one of the best defensive lines in the country. So we're going to see. I hope for LSU's sake that Garrett is true to his word, saying, I'm going to try to be more mobile and move the pocket more this year, because he's going to need it right away on August 30th. But yeah, the offensive line it's the hugest question mark. It's the difference between making the playoff and having a quote unquote disappointing season again for LSU, because not only did you lose four starters, the one starter, the returning DJ Chester, may get moved over to guard, right, Wilson, with Braylon Moore transferring in from Virginia Tech. And so and it's not just talent, it's not just experience, it's chemistry and cohesion. I keep going back to that in the offseason. They have a great collection of talent. Do they have a team? And that's going to be as telling on the offense and on the offensive line and in the secondary as much as anywhere, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's it'll be interesting. And with my comment, I don't mean to say like these guys can't be any good. I think it's a little bit like damning with faint praise to be like, well, there's no true freshmen out there. Nobody else has true freshmen.
High school kids.
Yeah. They're all on scholarship, guys. So I don't know. It just seemed a little bit, he was just saying things just to say things. Anything else either about LSU, what Brian Kelly said, what any of the players said, or maybe what another team's coach said that caught y'all's ears in Atlanta last week?
Well, this sort of looks too far ahead probably for this podcast, but because it's really more about 2026 and 2025. But I was sort of struck by what Mississippi State's players said about LSU's new backup quarterback, Michael Van Buren. I'll make this short because, again, this relates to 2026 and with the portal and such, who knows what things look like in the offseason. But, like, they were really complimentary of him and think pretty highly about what his future could be. Blake Shapen, Mississippi State's quarterback, who was injured most of last season, which is why Van Buren started as much as he did as a freshman, said that he has all the traits and everything necessary to be a really good quarterback. And so, LSU is going to have a big decision to make in terms of what it targets in the transfer portal, how it goes after that position in the offseason. Van Buren comes in, and we'll see how things develop over the next few months if LSU feels like he can be the guy next year or not. But they have somebody in the building who at least offers some really interesting, an interesting skill set, some intriguing, things to work with there. And Mississippi State players really thought highly of him, even though he had left. And so I thought that kind of stood out to me that in 2026, post Nussmeier, what are you going to do at quarterback? There's not going to be that guy, that obvious guy in the building, but hey, maybe it's Van Buren.
Well, and for 2025, I mean, look, if certainly you don't want Garrett Nussmeier to get hurt, but if it's for a game or two, it's like maybe it's not a bottom falls out situation because you have a guy with starting experience in the SEC to step in. So I think that's a good point. Rab, anything to you?
Yeah. The players they brought to media days, obviously Garrett Nussmeier, one of the stars of the league. Whit Weeks, great talker, great star on defense. I'm sure everybody loved him because his attitude is just infectious. But they brought Chris Hilton as well. And I thought that was a very interesting choice. There was a lot of guys they could have made that third guy. They could have brought Aaron Anderson, for example. But they brought Chris Hilton. And obviously it's not any indication of the kind of season you're going to have. But it was spoke to Brian Kelly's confidence in him. He's not the biggest talker, and you knew that, and he wasn't, and he didn't always look comfortable, with all the barrage of questions he was getting. I mean, these guys go from one room to another at media days, and I'm sure they're tired of talking by the end of the day. But Chris Hilton, people remember, last year, when is he going to play? When is he going to play? And he finally got back out on the field late last year, and we saw the things he did. He really helped stretch defenses, for LSU with a vertical passing game. And he also mentioned, by the way, I don't want to just be the vertical threat. I want to be a guy they can put anywhere and affect the offense in a positive way, with the underneath routes and the intermediate routes and that sort of thing. But I thought it was a good sign that Brian Kelly had enough confidence in Chris Hilton as someone to represent the team. Not going to say anything, inflammatory or idiotic at media days. And also that, that's an indication of what he expects he can be for this team this year. And like I said, for LSU to be the best version of itself on offense, Chris Hilton has to be a big contributor. And I think this is a sign that they think he will be that. So I thought that was, if you're an LSU fan, it's a very small thing, but I think you could take that as a positive.
One quick thing, just kind of a bit of color, I suppose, was at LSU State. Chris Hilton's parents were in the lobby at the College Football Hall of Fame. They were, I think it was right. I got to talk to them for a minute. His younger brother was maybe in the area for a track meet, and like his dad went ahead and came up, and his younger brother and his mom were there too. Anyway, all of them ended up there on Monday at SEC Media Days to watch him. They were just so excited because they've been waiting for years for him to kind of have that breakout season, and his whole family's been waiting for years. I mean, that's been a challenge for them to watch him get injured over and over and over again like he has. And so if this could finally be the season where he can stay on the field and stay healthy, and maybe he can have, the kind of year that everybody has always expected of him, then, that'd be great for a guy who is, sort of waited his turn. I mean, remember, he was in the same class as Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas and Jack Besh, guys who've all gotten drafted now. And he's still at LSU trying to finally have that healthy season. And if he can, then it's going to be huge for LSU's offense. Garrett Nussmeier said that. He said, you saw what our offense would have been in the last two games of the season if they had Chris Hilton healthy all year. That was one of the things that Garrett has said, I think, a few times now, and he said it again at media days. They really think highly of what he can do.
Yeah, I make these slides for these podcasts, and I put Chris Hilton's little cutout down there for our injury report like 10 times last year. I'd like to put it down there for some other reasons. So hoping for good health for Chris. Guys, before we wrap things up, there are a couple of more big picture stories that came out from Atlanta. Rab, you mentioned we mentioned both of these at the top. Actually, media days could come to New Orleans sooner rather than later. Any details on that, where it would be, what it would look like?
Yes. Well, first of all, it wouldn't be, there's no site has been picked next year for media days. It could go in a lot of different places. And the SEC, since they started moving it around 2018, going to Atlanta, they've had that propensity. So I would expect it's going to be somewhere. It could be Birmingham, but probably somewhere else. Maybe Florida. New Orleans can't host it next year because of some of the kind of conflict. But 2027 or beyond, New Orleans is very interested in hosting the event. Jeff Hundley from the Sugar Bowl, the CEO, was there most of the week, and he was talking about that. And he said, I think they see it as something to, as I said, kick off the season. And obviously you end the season in the college football playoff in New Orleans with the Sugar Bowl. The two sites it would be on the floor of the Superdome, which is something like the Big 12 has done at AT&T Stadium again in Dallas. I think there's some pros and cons to that. You have a lot of empty seats, but then at the same time you're on the field. It's pretty cool. And the second would be at the New Orleans Convention Center, the Morial Convention Center, which of course just hosted the NFL Media Center and Radio Row, and that whole show that is, and the NFL Experience next door for the fans. There's an enormous amount of room. It would easily swallow up SEC Media Days. So one of those two places most likely seems to be. But I'd be surprised. New Orleans just seems like a natural, to have this event, and I think everyone who covered Media Days, a show of hands, I think New Orleans would. Where would you like it to go next? I think New Orleans would have won. So I think it'll be there 2027, 2028, 2029, something like that. It's coming.
And then the other one you guys sort of poo-pooed already, but Nick Saban returning to coaching. Hugh Freeze is on the hot seat. Nick Saban to Auburn. Oops, what did I just say? No, just kidding. Probably not going to happen. A fun talking point for July.
Yeah, no. What was funny was Greg McElroy is the one who says, brings this up entirely. He drops this, hand grenade, and then he's like, it's like the we're all looking for the guy who did this kind of thing. The rest of the day, like tamping it down as he's making the rounds. Trying to be like, I wasn't really saying like that. And it's like, well, no, you said that. And now everybody's freaking out about it because you played quarterback for Saban. And so that was kind of just a very July thing to happen. It's like indicative of the fact that we at least need practice to start. Let's start talking about things that are actually happening on the field. Interesting though that, Saban wasn't there this year. He was last year in his first year as a TV analyst, but I'm sure we'll see him on game day soon enough.
Boy, this was and look, it has some legs, if not for nothing else, the fact that Bill Belichick came back to coaching and is coaching in college football, right? But Paul Feinbaum, for his part, shot this down, and he made one of the best points. Nick's gonna be 74 in October, so before, even if he came back next season somewhere, he'd be 74 years old. And is he gonna coach for 4 years till he's 78 or something like that? I gotta believe he's just enjoying himself playing golf. And working a lot for not making a lot of money for not working too much on ESPN, and he's very good as an analyst. I've always said, whenever Nick opens his mouth, he says something interesting. So I don't want to be shocked by anything. Nothing would surprise me. I guess Bill Belichick being one of the best examples. You try not to be shocked by anything, though. That was pretty shocking. But I just don't see Nick coming back to coaching. All the reasons he got out are still there, and they're multiplied now, with the transfer portal and NIL and all these things. So it's not changing. So I don't think he's coming back. No way.
He didn't want to deal with NIL. Come on, what are we doing? He's gonna, and at 75, he's going to change his mind and go try again. I don't think so. All right, yeah. There's lots of schedule talk and things like that. 8 games versus 9 games. It feels like we're finally nearing the finish line on that, but we'll discuss that when it happens. Until then, like you're right, Wilson, Allen Iverson can eat his heart out, but we're ready to talk about practice.
That's right. Yeah. Hey, a week, almost just about a week away from that, with the season starting August 30th, right about a month before that. So late next week, we'll have at some point our first media availability to LSU's practice. They'll report next week and start, things will start gearing up. We'll finally be able to see some things about this team, that we've been wondering about since the end of spring practice. Where did they added 2 transfers in the portal, AJ Halsey and Bernard Gooden. Where do they fit into things? And there's a lot more that we can get into. Let's save that for next week's podcast, I think, and before I get to myself too far off the rails.
Yeah, absolutely. We will be back probably before LSU starts camp with kind of a what to watch for episode, and that'll be next on the LSU Insider feed. So stay tuned. Sign up for notifications. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. That's the best place to find us, to find the LSU Insider podcast. We'll also start posting some shorts there from practice, some from press conferences, things like that once they get going next week. So you can also find these guys' work, theadvocate.com/LSU. Read Wilson's stories about Barry and Brown, about the offensive line, all those sorts of things, Rab's takeaways from media days. It's all good stuff, and it's all there. So until next time, for Wilson Alexander, and Scott Rabalais. I'm Zach Ewing, and this has been the LSU Sports Insider.